I'm Joshua Harris, Communication and Public Information Director for the City of Lenoir, and I'm with Chief Brent Phelps again with the Lenoir Police Department. Chief,
hi Josh, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We already had a discussion about some policies regarding the 8 Can't Wait.
That's correct.
But we also wanted to have a discussion about some things we get a lot of questions about.
Sure.
At the police department. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, one of the questions we get a lot is, how does the hiring process work?
Gotcha.
Okay. Sometimes people are curious if you know who's applying, or or if you know the race or gender or those kinds of things. So let's just talk to me about the general hiring process. How the applications come in, what you see when you're going through the applications, and so on.
Okay. Typically, the first step is the city application that can be found online on our website, can be printed off, filled out, mailed in. That initially comes to City Hall and goes to our Human Resources Director, Crystal Smith. She reviews them, she logs them into a database, and then she sends the applications to each department with whatever department they're applying for. Say the police department, then they come down, they come to the police department, and we intake them. They will go to my administrative assistant. She logs them into a system, just recording that we've received it, and then it goes initially to the patrol captain for his initial review. One of the things that we get questions on from time to time is there is a page in the city application that covers gender, race, and some demographic information for that individual. By federal law, that is actually removed by our Human Resources Director before it comes to us, and comes down to the department. Back several years ago, when I was the support services captain working for Chief Brown, that was part of my role. They would come to me.
The applications?
The applications after they came in, and there were several times where, depending on the individual's name, and I was calling to set up an initial interview, I didn't know whether it was a male or female, much less a race, their race. And so that's removed by law. We don't know unless we know the individual, like it's somebody we've had interaction with, or somebody that has called and said, "Hey, I'm looking to come here." We don't get to review that, and that's on purpose and by federal law, so employers cannot use that information to disqualify somebody.
To discriminate.
Sure.
So once you're making that phone call to the person, where are you in that process? Are you getting ready to schedule an interview when you're making that phone call, or what's happening there?
Typically, yes. The patrol captain is going to review those, look at the information on the application. If, depending on how many openings we have and the number of applications we're needing to try to review, they will come up with a pool, and then they will begin calling those individuals to set up an initial interview. When that interview happens, the applicant's going to come in. They're going to meet with the patrol captain. He is going to go over the qualifications for the job. He's going to give them some more documentation to leave with to begin to start filling out. And then that file will go to our training lieutenant. And that training lieutenant will begin what we call a Tier 1 part of the background. And that's where we start pulling criminal history and documentation to put in the file.
So don't apply if you can't pass a background check.
If
or can you?
You can apply.
You can always apply.
You can always apply. But obviously, for the police department, there are things by state standards that would be disqualifiers for people that apply with us. And we don't set those. Those are mandated by North Carolina training standards of what those qualifications are. And so, but we work through that. One of the things that I tell when I teach in the Basic Law Enforcement Academy here in Caldwell or up at Appalachian State, one of the things I tell the cadets is the 100% thing is, number one, be truthful. Be an open book. we know that we're not going to hire perfect people because there are none of those.
Right.
And sometimes some of the questions, especially when you get into the what we call an F3, which is the state background form that is mandated that has to be done, there are some very specific questions about your alcohol use, your drug use. You know, it covers a lot of stuff. And there's a tendency a lot of times, especially for somebody that's young and wanting a job, you know.
I don't do anything bad.
Yes,
ever.
I'm perfect.
Never done anything.
You know, I never drank alcohol underage. And, you know, maybe that's true and that's great if it is. But the majority of things we can work through.
Right.
But it's got to be true.
Right, yeah.
And what we see gets a lot of people disqualified is if they lie or are untruthful in the paperwork, and then as a part of the process, something else comes out, we've got a documented lie.
Yeah.
And that is a huge hurdle to overcome for a law enforcement officer.
Because if you're going to lie on the application, why wouldn't you lie when you're filing a report?
Right.
I mean, yeah, that's...
And so and there are some things, some federal law that we are mandated as a police department about witnesses for court. And if I document one of my officers has lied to the department, I have to release that to the district attorney's office. And then they make the decision whether that person will ever be able to testify in court again. Well, for us at the police department, if the court rules that you're not trustworthy enough to testify in court, it's hard for me to keep somebody on as a police officer.
Yeah.
So, number one thing in the application process is be truthful. Be an open book. We all make mistakes. I may make a mistake before we get out of the studio. Mistakes we can overcome, but lies we can't.
Yeah.
So then the next steps are there's an oral board. That is an oral board interview where the candidates come in and they sit down in front of 3 to 5 officers, and there's a list of questions. That can be a very intimidating process. We don't set it up to be intimidating; it's just stressful. But that is the interview for an applicant. You need to come in. You need to be looking your best. You know, you need to, if you need to make sure that, if you have a suit, you need to look sharp. You don't have to have a suit, but, that's not a shorts and T-shirt kind of interview.
So let me interject here.
Sure.
So how many, do we have openings right now on the force?
We do.
Okay.
We've got 2.
One thing that I've heard before, and it's not uncommon to hear, are people will say, you don't have, the police department doesn't look like the community, which generally means that you don't have enough minorities, or maybe you don't have enough women. So if you've got somebody that makes it to the interview and is qualified, and we need officers, to me, it doesn't seem like you're going to turn people away. If they are a qualified officer who has applied and wants a job.
Right.
So,
there are things, unfortunately, that come up in people's backgrounds that end up excluding them. Under personnel law, I can't discuss those specific situations for that individual.
Sure.
But, the very end of the process is a psychological that is mandated. We get a lot of questions, do your officers have to have a psychological test? Yes, in North Carolina they do. And I, as an agency head, I get to decide. It doesn't, our rules through training standards doesn't say they have to pass a psychological, it says they have to have one. And the agency head gets to decide whether they want to go forward.
Right.
And the psychological comes back to us as they feel like a psychologist, after they've interviewed them, that this individual is suitable or not suitable for this type of work.
Right.
And so, there have been times in my career where there was some concerns and they were rated unsuitable, and that typically I'm not aware of when I was a captain or myself when a chief went against a psychological result, if it said they were unsuitable.
Yeah.
You could, but I'm not aware of that. So that's one thing and that's done at the very end. I mean, so somebody could be way through the process and that'd be a hurdle, but that doesn't happen a whole lot. Those are a lot more rare. But we need good candidates. We need good officers. I too hear the question about specific minority groups and us needing more. I agree with that. I want good men and women from all of our cultures and different ethnic groups.
A good police officer is a good police officer,
That's right. That's right. And I want folks from all of our community to represent the community as a whole. I want those professional officers working at the department that young kids in those communities can look up to and say, I want to do what he does. And so a lot of times I challenge, when I get asked that, help me find candidates that want to go into this. With everything going on right now, and that is a concern for chiefs, is how hard it may be to get people to continue to want to go into this line of work.
Yeah, I understand that. I have a lot of empathy, or that's not the right word, sympathy for law enforcement, because it's a tough sell at the moment. But
well, it is hard. It's hard to find people that are willing to serve others before they serve themselves. And the thing that we harp on and talk on is, we do a job that matters, and we do a job that is important. And cops, we're cool, and we don't like to get cheesy. But at the end of the day, somewhere deep down inside, our officers know that we're impacting people's lives. And when our career's done, we can look back and say, what I spent my life work-wise made a difference in other people.
like we touched on in the other video we did, 33,000 interactions.
Right.
In 2019.
Right.
33,000 in 1 year.
Right.
Where you're, making a difference.
That's right.
And helping people out.
Yep.
So that is a big deal. So
I have had citizens tell me, not specifically with me, but about officers, that the way an officer interacted with them made them want to go into law enforcement. When you think about that, for a grown adult to say, the way that guy treated me or interacted with me made me want to do that for the rest of my life, that's powerful. And so we need good people. It's a good profession. It's not necessarily an easy profession, but it's an important profession.
Okay. All right. So let's go. We got another question here that I think is maybe not asked a lot, but is just something good to know. Tell us about body cameras. Does the Lenoir Police Department use body cameras? When did we start? How does that footage work? Those kinds of things.
Sure. We do. We have body cameras for all of our uniformed officers, the majority of our investigators, and we started, we implemented it back in 2015. We were actually testing 3 models. We had 3 models that were in a field test where the company had given them to us to try when Ferguson happened. And now Ferguson helped us speed up some of that process. We initially were looking at a phase-in, and after some of that incident, Chief Brown at the time spoke with council, and we implemented it department-wide. We've got policy on our cameras dictating when they have to be on, which is pretty much in the majority of all interactions, especially if there's an interaction that potentially has force. There are some exceptions where if an officer is doing like our SROs, they're in that school for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
So obviously they don't have to have that on the entire 8 hours. But if while they're interacting, something occurs, then they can turn it on.
Right.
But the The footage is downloaded wirelessly
Does that happen
at our department.
automatically, or?
It from the vehicles, yes. From the actual cameras, they have to be docked and uploaded. But the footage cannot be edited. It cannot be deleted, and there is tracking software to where anytime somebody goes into the system and even looks at the footage, it shows that.
Now, I have actually received a question, not related to the police department, but how do I get this body camera footage? How does that work for us?
There is.
I assume if there's an investigation, you can't get it but.
The majority of the time, that's correct. There is North Carolina general statute governing the release of video from law enforcement agencies. And if there is a criminal investigation, that footage is released to the district attorney's office, and then it is released to the
defense attorney.
It can be viewed by a party that is in the video. So if, say, I stopped you for speeding and you had a concern and you wanted to see it, I don't have to, but I can, as the department head, I can allow you to watch it with me as long as you are in the video.
Right.
However, you cannot watch any parts of the video that you are not in. So we have to show the parts where the officer's up at the car talking to the individual, and then once the officer leaves, we have to stop that. They're not allowed.
Is there ever a point where the body camera video is public record in the sense that anybody can see it?
There is a process through the court system for it to be released to the public or to an individual. And you have to get a judge to sign an order releasing that footage.
You, whomever's petitioning. Okay,
and the reason for that, I think, obviously I was not involved in that decision making in Congress when it was put into law, but the thing people, a lot of times when they're thinking about it, they're thinking about their interaction with the officer. They're not thinking about the privacy of all that video.
Sure. Yeah.
You think about, our officers are in people's homes recording, and if your neighbor didn't like you and they knew that the cops came over and law enforcement came over and went in and worked through a domestic in your living room, and there wasn't that governing that, your neighbor could come up to the police department, request a copy of that, and watch that.
I wouldn't like that.
No, I mean, there's a lot of privacy issues there that we, as officers in doing our job, are tasked with being involved in, and not all of that needs to be released to the public.
Right. Just
because somebody wants to see.
Do your officers like the body cameras?
Yes. Obviously, when we were starting the program, we had concerns that the officers were going to feel like, well, it's Big Brother, and it's, they're documenting everything I do. Our officers see what we see, that this is a valuable tool because it captures the job we do. Because I have had many complaints where somebody calls in and what they tell me on the phone is not accurate. I'm not saying they're bold-faced lying, but the things they say occur did not occur.
Memory is a tricky thing. So
when there's been several times where I've called individuals back and said, I've watched the body camera footage, and then they hang up on me. And so, and the majority of what we see is 99% of the time, the footage shows the good job that the officer did.
Yeah.
And we've got stuff in policy that if the camera is malfunctioning, they have to report that to try to get it fixed by our IT department as quick as possible. And that's something that our officers do because they want it. They want it to be working.
Right.
Because it does protect them, and it documents what occurred.
Do you have any idea how many hours of footage we have downloaded?
Our system empties if it is not held for court or tagged to be saved based on a complaint or an issue after a 30-day period. the servers wipe it. If that didn't happen, it would cost an astronomical amount to keep, because this is, high definition video, and so it takes a lot of space.
So if you are a resident and something happens that you feel is not correct,
Yeah.
you need to let you know
Yes.
soon.
Right.
Don't wait around and
Right.
a year from now,
Correct.
because the body cam video might be gone.
It could be gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if it's an issue, our stance, along with some other retention 911 calls, those through state guidelines, those erase if they're not saved on servers after 30 days.
Right, yeah.
And so our contention
I
is
think-
if it was a big deal, why would you wait over a month
Right.
to call about it?
I think sometimes people think, well, it's digital, save it all. But
Right.
that's
There's a cost.
that's almost impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you did, it would be extremely expensive.
We have a lot of footage when you think about all of our interactions.
33,000 in 2019.
Yeah, well, and you think about those, that's just the number of interactions. Think about the time frame. We have officers that may be on a call for an hour, 2 hours. If it's a specific crime scene, we could be there for several hours. And so that is a lot of footage, and takes a lot of storage space.
So we have them body
do.
cameras. The officers generally like them.
That's correct.
And we keep the video for at least 30 days.
Yep.
So, okay.
Unless it's tagged,
Yeah.
and
Or in a part of an investigation. and so
part
on
of
and
an
so forth.
investigation for court, then it's kept.
Okay. How do officers, or how does the police department handle complaints?
Okay.
So I got pulled over. I think you pulled me over for just because you didn't like me, and I come in and I want to complain.
Right.
How do I do that, and then what happens?
Okay. All right. We all of our complaints are documented and tracked. We kind of have two categories that they end up going into. One of them we call an inquiry, and that is where and it's more or less just an internal review. Sometimes those are handled by the immediate supervisor of the officer, where the supervisor looks into it, it's documented, and make sure that we did what we were supposed to do. And a lot of times, the majority of times, what ends up occurring in those is when we look into it and we understand why the officer did what he did, and we're able to explain that to the citizen. Oh, well, I didn't know that part. And so it makes sense to them of why the officer did what they did, and they were okay with it. And sometimes, it's not, we had the legal right to do what we did, but it's how we did it that created the concern. And so those are teaching and coaching and moments to where, and we have them, where we can interact with that officer and say, yes, you had the legal right to do what you did here, but it was how you did it that made this person feel this, or this. And we can give coaching moments and try to learn from those and be better because of it.
Do you always touch base back with the person that filed the complaint to inform them of?
One of the things that it's important for the public to know, we will let them know that we have handled the complaint. But due to personnel law, we cannot tell them what we did concerning the complaint. I wish we could, because I think it would. We are trying to be transparent at the department. You hear that word nationwide. We need transparency from police departments. Well, legally, we can't tell people this is what we did.
Right.
We can tell people we've looked into it and we've handled it and we have addressed the incident. Well, if people don't believe us, if people don't believe the chief or a captain or a lieutenant that, yeah, they didn't do anything about it, that hurts us.
There's not much you can do to
Right.
convince them.
Because legally, we cannot discuss if there was any type of disciplinary action taken, we cannot discuss that with the public. I can't discuss that with the general department.
It might be difficult to keep officers if you made all of that public.
It might be.
I mean,
you may be right.
If you make a mistake and you're corrected by your supervisor and you learn from it, then that seems like a win.
Yeah.
But if you start airing that, people might be like, this is not the job for me.
Well, it is a tough job.
Yeah.
And, like we've said earlier, we're human.
Right.
We learn from it. But I do think that is a part of, at least in North Carolina, I can't speak for all states, one of the things that doesn't help the transparency piece.
Yeah.
But I don't know
Well, there are.
that will go away.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are limits to transparency.
Right.
In the real world.
Right.
In the theoretical world, you might want all the transparency
Correct.
you want, but in the real world, I think there are limits. And I'm a former newspaper reporter, so
Right.
I'm a fan of knowing what local
Right.
government is doing.
Right.
But sometimes,
Yeah. Everybody. We as people, we want everybody else held accountable until it's my turn to be held accountable.
transparency for you, but
Yes.
my stuff's private.
And that's hard,
It is.
And sometimes being held accountable is not always a fun process.
Right.
At times when I've been held accountable in my law enforcement career, I didn't enjoy it, but I learned from it.
So I guess to touch back on what you said, I mean, the police department handles complaints,
Yes.
often makes corrections, and the only thing we can really tell people is that we handled it. And you have to have the relationship there with the people to believe what you say. I mean, if you're not going to believe them, if you're not going to believe the police, then
The one thing I didn't clarify, I talked about the two types. And I talked about the
inquiry, and then
The other is if it is certain things by our policy, excessive force, sexual assaults, pretty much crimes, then those are going to go directly to the chief, and I will assign that for what in ours is called a professional standards investigation, but a lot of the public would understand it from an internal investigation. Those would be assigned to one of the three captains. I typically don't assign it to the captain that the officer works for. I assign it to one of the other division commanders that they don't work directly for. That way, one, it takes that perception of there being a buddy,
Right.
out of that. And we've been doing that at the department for a long time. That's not new. And then that division commander does a thorough investigation and then reports those findings back to the chief for a review. And either they are unfounded, the officer is exonerated, or if there are things found in there where some type of disciplinary action needs to be taken, then that comes from me. If it is where...
if there is evidence of a crime,
If there is evidence of a crime, we would contact the State Bureau of Investigation.
yeah.
And the SBI would be called in. We would do the internal investigation, and the SBI would do the criminal investigation. And that would be the outside agency that would potentially take criminal charges out on the officer.
Have we ever had that?
We have.
Yeah.
We've had it a couple of times where there have been charges taken out in my career of being here at the department. And then we've had several times where the SBI looks into it and looks into a situation and for one reason or another there's not criminal charges, but we still do a separate internal. And so there could be a scenario where the department does disciplinary action based on what we found, but it wasn't ruled that it was at a criminal level.
Right.
Depending on whatever it is.
Sure.
That could be a wide variety
Yeah.
of things.
But then back to the transparency part, I mean, you can't really say anything about it, right?
No.
I mean,
No. Nope. We can't discuss it.
Even if you fire an officer,
Right.
all you can say is that we had to fire the officer. Right. I mean,
There is some North Carolina public records law, and any documentation for the demotion or termination can be released under public records. And so if we terminated somebody, anything we documented in that termination could be released publicly. Sometimes that's where media outlets obtain that sort of thing. But, you know, if they're not terminated, then our ability to release that information is very limited.
well, if they're not terminated, hopefully they're corrected.
That's correct.
And,
Right.
right, so,
Yep.
okay. Let's see. I
And the
think,
majority of the time, those are very few.
Yeah.
Those are with the, like we said,
33,000.
the 33,000
2019.
interactions. I don't have the number. I probably should know it off the top of my head of internal investigations we did last year, but it was very small.
yeah.
And so that is where I'm proud of the officers. I'm proud of the job that our officers do, because they make mistakes just like we all
Sure.
do. But intentional type things is where it gets you into that criminal stuff. A lot of
Yeah.
times, you know, that we don't put up with that. We don't tolerate it. And you will see that the officers at our department, and the majority of officers nationwide, they don't want it either. Because when somebody does intentional things, it makes everybody look bad.
Yeah.
You know, and at times as a chief, it almost feels a little unfair. You know, I'm responsible for 55 officers at Lenoir and the citizens in our communities. But, you know, as a chief, at times with social media, it almost feels like I'm responsible for every officer in America.
Yeah.
I knew this past weekend that I would be answering questions last week about Atlanta.
Yeah.
And yes, I have to stay on top of those things, and I have to make sure that our officers are conducting themselves in a professional manner and legal manner. But it does frustrate officers when we get lumped into categories that, you know, we're corrupt and we're involved in this type of behavior. Because I contend that's not the case.
I would agree. I think, not every police department is the same. I mean,
correct.
right? Not every state is the same.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, media can put a spotlight on one situation.
Sure.
And nobody. We don't have video of the 33,000 interactions.
Right.
We don't have video of that.
Right. Well, and the normal day in, day out interactions, that's not going to sell papers. That's not going to sell TV time. That's an officer issuing a traffic citation for an expired tag, a speeding issue, and there's no issues, and everybody goes about their business. And so,
I mean, not to say that we shouldn't know about these events that the media put the spotlight on, but just to say that that's one event, and you can't judge all.
that's correct.
Or I don't think you can judge all police.
I don't. I don't think it's fair to judge anybody based solely on the mistakes of others.
Right.
You know, I've been in an operating room about 3 times in my life. I don't hold the doctors that I went and had surgery. I don't hold them responsible for other mistakes from other doctors.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add? So we talked about the hiring process, body cameras, complaints. Are there any other questions that you get often that I haven't thought of that people ask out in the community?
That's such a wide variety of things. You know, one of the things that I think a lot of the public thinks is that our officers, they just come into work and they
eat donuts.
They get in the car. We do hear donuts, yes. Yeah. We don't eat donuts in uniform, not in public. We send our narcotics officers over to buy them undercover. And No, but they think officers come in and just, go out and just do whatever. Well, it's a lot more to it than that. We look at our data. We look at the things that are going on. One of the things where we interact with the public a good bit on a yearly basis is traffic stops. Now, I think a lot of the public thinks, well, they're just out trying to get a free toaster, or they're out, you hear
Free
that.
toaster as in if you write enough tickets, you
Correct.
get, okay.
We hear that a lot.
You got to warm up your donuts.
Yeah, you're right. But they think, well, they're just out seeing how many tickets we can write today. Actually, we look at where our accidents occur, and then we specifically do enforcement in a proactive way in those areas, trying to slow people down. For Lenoir, from the crossroads up until about Excella and Blue Ridge is where we have the majority of the accidents quarter after quarter. Well, why is that? That's the most dense area for people and vehicles we have in the city. And so some of those intersections in that area, quarter after quarter, we have accidents at those locations. So if we can slow vehicles down before they get in that area, there's a higher chance of them having the ability to avoid an accident. If somebody's trying to pull in somewhere or somebody's pulling out. And so our goal with doing traffic enforcement is to slow the public down so it reduces the number of accidents, essentially keeping the public safe.
I wonder if the majority of those accidents are people that know that you need to slow down when you come through Smith's Crossroads, or people that just happen to be going up to the mountains and don't realize that.
I don't know. I don't.
It's going to get a little more hairy up here, so.
That's an area where there's just a lot of cars, and there's a lot of people coming in and out of the roadway, and so
I've watched people.
That's specific.
I've watched people in those intersections merge, and I'm just like, oh.
Yeah.
You got lucky. You got lucky.
And for traffic enforcement, that's a no-win situation for the police department. If we go out and we do proactive enforcement, and we issue a bunch of tickets, well, we're out ruining people's day, and writing people tickets. Nobody likes getting tickets.
But if you don't,
but if we don't, then it's the Lenoir 500, and we don't care, and we're just letting people drive however they want to drive. And so, it's one of those things that we have to not go off of public opinion. We have to look at our information and our data and make the right decision for how we enforce that type of activity.
So obey the speed limits in Lenoir.
Obey the speed limits.
And when you're outside, the highway patrol.
The highway patrol deals with 321 North and 321 South, along with Hudson and Granite. So,
something that popped into my mind when we were thinking about other things is I hear the term a lot, community policing.
Yes.
Right. Community policing. So, and lots of times I'm like, well, what do you mean by that?
Right.
Which I think is a question a lot of people have. What do you mean by community policing versus what we would think of as normal policing? So, what is your impression of what people mean by it, and is that something that could happen in Lenoir or?
Sure. We have been a community policing department since I started. When I started in the mid-90s, the department claimed and worked hard to be a community policing department. I think it was 97 or 98, we received an award from the governor's office for being a community policing agency.
When I think of that term, I think of parking your car, getting out, walking around the community, shaking people's hands, saying hey.
Right.
But I don't think that's really, is that?
Community policing, a lot of times agencies have their own version of what that means to them. Because the activities that are done in this area or this city may not work in all cities. And so agencies have to...
Right, because it would be difficult to walk around. It would be difficult to get out of your car and walk around various neighborhoods here because you'd be walking like hours.
Well,
so
and It's changed over the years from as our communities have changed, some of our practices have changed. And yes, some of what you described is part of community policing, finding those ways to interact with the community where our officers know the people that live in the community and know who they are. And so that component is there.
Okay.
But it's finding that piece for each agency of how we're interacting in a positive manner with our community for those relationships.
So what does the Lenoir department do as far as community policing goes for our city? Like, what are some things that we do?
We have a lot of different types of activities that we engage in and are involved in on a yearly basis. The Citizens Police Academy.
Okay,
we have
right.
done that for a number of years. We have a K-9 Citizens Academy. We've done that for a number of years. There are some other programs that our SROs are involved in the schools. We have our community resource officer that teaches DARE in all the elementary schools. We take a kid fishing. We weren't able to do it this year because of
Sure.
COVID, but where we work with the school system and through the guidance counselors, they select, I believe it's fourth graders, and we take a group fishing with officers. Wildlife assist us with that. That's a neat, fun time. We grill hot dogs out there and feed lunch, and then they go back to the school. We're involved in all kinds of different groups, from neighborhood watch programs to Rotary to different organizations that officers go and present at. We're always looking for more. We're always looking for what are other groups or communities that we can go and engage in and work on those relationships. We do coffee with a cop once every quarter, just trying to create those opportunities to engage.
So Lenoir, I guess, so we have, about 17,000 people. I mean, would it be feasible to have officers assigned to particular neighborhoods? That doesn't seem to me like it would be feasible, but...
Could we do that? Yes. We do have patrol districts.
Okay.
And those districts, officers on a daily basis are assigned to those districts.
Okay.
But the officers rotate
around.
in the different districts.
I mean,
the other thing is, as call volume, unless we said, we want you to be in this small neighborhood and not come out, if there's a lot of calls for service, then we either have an officer just riding around on streets when we have calls pending, and so sometimes it's a little harder with our call volume to do what some people think of community policing as being on foot and just walking through a neighborhood. That does occur, but it is on a more limited basis. But we're looking at ways to improve or find those opportunities where we can interact in smaller settings.
It's one of those situations where, not all police departments are the same, not all towns are the same. I mean, you can't apply things that you do in, cities with 1 million people to small towns with 17,000 people. So,
some of the big agencies with cities, they have a lot of officers. The last time I looked, and I'm not sure the number exactly, but I think New York has like 33 or 34,000 officers for the entire
That's a lot.
New York City police officers. And so, they have a lot of officers to pull from. Well, we have 55, which is a good-sized department for our state. We're a mid-sized police department, but we also, calls for service, we're busy. And where some smaller agencies don't have the call volume, sometimes they can do more interaction in their community because they're not responding to as many calls.
Right.
And so we have to try to find that balance. And, I wish there was money and funds to where I could have a community policing platoon where I had 4 or 5 people that's all they focused on was community events and neighborhoods and some of our retirement communities. And man, it would be great. And we could do some really neat stuff with that. But obviously, got to balance.
Yeah.
And where there are needs in the police department, there's also needs in the fire department. There's also needs in public works, paving our streets. And our city does a lot, and I do commend them because they do work hard at trying to use those dollars citywide to provide the services. So.
I think we do a pretty good job. So
we do our best. We work really hard. I'm proud of our customer service for the department. I remember back years ago when we were starting to implement customer service, and I thought, oh, that's just something somebody's thought of. But I can tell you, I see a difference in how we as a city interact from department to department and departments to citizens. Based on our customer service and that culture of we're going to go above and beyond. We're going to try to do the right thing. If it's something we can do to help a citizen or take care of them, we're going to try our best to do that.
Well, I think we covered a lot, so thank you again, Chief Phelps, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me here.